We can begin.
The House Committee on the Judiciary will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recesses of the committee at any time. We welcome everyone to this morning's hearing on oversight of the Department of Justice. Before we begin, I would like to remind members that we have established an email address and distribution list dedicated to circulating exhibits, motions, or other written materials that members might want to offer as part of our hearing today. If you would like to submit materials, please send them to the email address that has been previously distributed to your offices, and we will circulate the materials to members and staff as quickly as we can. I would also remind all members that guidance from the Office of Attending Physician states that face coverings are required for all meetings in an enclosed space, such as committee hearings, except when you are recognized to speak. I will now recognize myself for an opening statement. Good morning, Mr. Attorney General, and thank you for appearing before our committee today. When the Department of Justice performs as it should, it is a champion of the Bill of Rights, the protector of the rule of law, and the cornerstone of the institutions that make up our republic. As Attorney General, you have the responsibility to keep the department functioning at this high level, preserving the Constitution for our children and our children's children. You have assumed this enormous responsibility at a crossroads in our nation's history. For 4 years, the democratic institutions that you have sworn to protect, first as a judge and now as Attorney General, were deeply undermined by the former president and his political enablers. During that time, the Trump administration leveraged the department to protect the president and his friends and to punish his enemies, both real and imagined. And when the former president lost the last election, he summoned the top law enforcement officers in the country and demanded that they use the full power of the federal government to install him for another term. Trump's plan failed, at least in part because at least some department officials refused to help him overturn the election. Even now, however, the ex-president and his allies continue to cast doubt on the last election and appear to be drafting a plan to overturn the next one. And next time, we may not be so lucky. Your task as Attorney General is unenviable, Judge Garland, because you must build back everything DOJ lost under the last administration: its self-confidence, its reputation in the eyes of the American people, and an institutional respect for our Constitution and the rule of law. And it is not enough just to right the ship. As the chief law enforcement officer of our nation, it is also your responsibility to help the country understand and reckon with the violence and the lawlessness of the last administration while maintaining the department's prosecutorial independence. On January 6th, insurgents stormed the Capitol building in what appears to be a pre-planned, organized assault on our government, seeking to overturn the votes of their fellow Americans and believing in the lie told them by President Trump and his followers. I commend the department for doing the important work of bringing those responsible for the violence of January 6th to justice. I ask only that you continue to follow the facts and the law where they lead, because although you have rightly brought hundreds of charges against those who physically trespassed in the Capitol, the evidence suggests that you will soon have some hard decisions to make about those who organized and incited the attack in the first place. And we must acknowledge the simple truth that none of the individuals who attacked the Capitol that day appeared out of thin air. According to the Southern Poverty Law Center, membership in white nationalist groups grew 55% during the Trump presidency. Membership in hate groups overall remains historically high. The COVID-19 epidemic, as with many national crises, brought out both the best and the worst of our fellow Americans. While everyday heroes struggle to save lives and keep people safe, anti-Asian hate crimes and hate incidents skyrocketed. Innocent people lost their lives and communities were shadowed. I know DOJ and its components are key to the Biden administration's national strategy for countering violent extremism. And I'm looking forward to hearing more about how DOJ is working to prevent violent extremists from gaining further foothold in our country. This growth in extremist ideologies echoed in an epidemic of violence and intimidation directed at our healthcare professionals, teachers, essential workers, school board members, and election workers. To be clear, we are a country that prizes democratic involvement at every level of government. The right to be heard, to have a voice, is guaranteed by the Constitution. But nobody has a right to threaten his or her fellow citizens with violence. You were absolutely right to ask the FBI and federal prosecutors to meet with local law enforcement agencies and set up dedicated lines of communication so that we can confront this spike in violence head on. There's a broader pattern here. In each of these cases, former President Trump's big lie, the rise in hate crimes against citizens of Asian descent, and the growing threats of violence against public servants, the same set of individuals have leveraged the same sorts of misinformation, stoked the same sorts of grievances, and shown remarkably little interest in solving our problems. But this country, and your tenure as Attorney General, cannot be defined only by the outrages of the last 4 years. We have much more to do to deliver on our nation's fundamental promise of liberty and justice for all. Black and brown Americans deserve to live in a country where they can trust that their local police departments will protect, not endanger, their families. I applaud you for taking steps to limit the use of chokeholds and no-knock warrants, and we must continue to work together to address the issues that allow for our criminal justice system to so disproportionately impact people of color. Across the country, state legislatures are restricting the right to vote in service of the most cynical political motives. Your department has rightly stepped in to secure our next election, and Congress owes you a Voting Rights Restoration Act that will give you the tools you need to consign these nakedly undemocratic efforts to the dustbin of history where they belong. Similarly, Texas' law to ban abortion after 6 weeks and punish abortion providers is designed to restrict its citizens' constitutionally protected rights. It does so by offering to pay a bounty to those who would turn in their neighbors, co-workers, or even strangers if they suspect someone violated the law or helped a woman get an abortion after 6 weeks. This deliberately creates an atmosphere of fear and suspicion that stops women from seeking help. It is a dangerous law that is repugnant to the Constitution, and I thank you for the department's swift action to protect these essential rights. We cannot become a country where only some people in some states enjoy their constitutional rights. As Attorney General, you have the power to help our country navigate the generational trauma of oppression and move past the challenges of the last 4 years. Thank you again for appearing before us today. I look forward to your testimony. I now recognize the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The chairman just said the Trump DOJ was political and went after their opponents. Are you kidding me? 3 weeks ago, the National School Board Association writes President Biden asking him to involve the FBI in local school board matters. 5 days later, the Attorney General of the United States does just that, does exactly what a political organization asked to be done. 5 days. We've sent, Republicans on this committee have sent the Attorney General 13 letters in the last 6 months. Takes weeks and months to get a response. 8 of the letters, we've got nothing. They just gave us the finger, said, we're not going to get back to you. And all our letters were actually sent to the Attorney General. Here's a letter sent to someone else asking for a specific thing to be done, and in 5 days, the Attorney General does it. Here's what the October 4th memo said. Quote, I'm directing the FBI to convene meetings with local leaders. These meetings will open dedicated lines of communication for threat reporting. Dedicated lines of communication for threat reporting. A snitch line on parents. Started 5 days after a left-wing political organization asked for it. That's not political. I don't know what is. Where's the dedicated lines of communication with local leaders regarding our southern border? Something that frankly is a federal matter. Where's the dedicated lines of communication on violent crime in our cities? Violent crime that has went up in every major urban area where Democrats have defunded the police. Nope, can't do that. Can't do that. The Biden Justice Department is going to go after parents who object to some racist, hate America curriculum. Nope, can't focus on the southern border where 1.7 million illegal encounters have happened this year alone. A record number. MS-13 can just waltz right across the border, but the Department of Justice, they're going to open up a snitch line on parents. Think about this. The same FBI that Mr. Garland is directing to open dedicated lines of communication for reporting on parents just a few years ago spied on 4 American citizens associated with President Trump's campaign. Clinton campaign hired Perkins Coie, who hired Fusion GPS, who hired Christopher Steele, who put a bunch of garbage together, gave it to the FBI. They used that as the basis to open up an investigation into a presidential campaign. Oh, and then there was Mr. Zussman, who worked at Perkins Coie, the firm hired by the Clinton campaign. He cut out all the middlemen. He just said, I'm just going to go directly to the FBI, and not just anyone at the FBI. Who'd he go to? Jim Baker, the chief counsel at the FBI, handed him a bunch of false information, told him false information, and of course, he's been indicted by the special counsel. A few weeks ago, the IG at the Department of Justice released a report that found that the FBI made over 200 errors, omissions, and lies in just 29 randomly selected FISA applications. But don't worry, the Attorney General of the United States just put them in charge of a dedicated line of communication to report on parents who attend school board meetings. Mr. Chairman, Americans are afraid. For the first time during my years in public office, first time, I talked to the good folks I get the privilege of representing in the 4th District of Ohio, folks all around the country. They tell me for the first time they fear their government. And frankly, I think it's obvious why. Every single liberty we enjoy under the First Amendment has been assaulted over the last year. Stop and think about it. Americans were told you couldn't go to church, couldn't go to work, couldn't go to school. Small business owners were told you're not an essential business, close your doors, causing many of them to go bankrupt. We were given curfews, stay-at-home orders. Last fall in Ohio, you had to be in your home at 10. In Pennsylvania, when you were in your home, you had to wear a mask. In Vermont, when you were in your home, you didn't have to wear a mask because you weren't allowed to have friends and family over. And of course, there's always a double standard with these folks. The folks who make the rules never seem to follow them. And now the Biden administration says, get a vaccine or lose your job. Even if you've had COVID and have natural immunity, get a vaccine or you will lose your job. Oh, I almost forgot. The Biden administration also wants another dedicated line of communication for reporting. They want a second snitch line. They want banks to report on every single transaction over $600 for every single American to the IRS. The IRS, that agency with its stellar record of customer service, the IRS, you know, the same IRS that targeted conservatives the last time Joe Biden was in the executive branch. Jefferson said once, tyranny is when the people fear the government. We're there. Sadly, we are there, but I don't think the good people of this great country are going to cower and hide. I think your memo, Mr. Attorney General, was the last straw. I think it was the catalyst for a great awakening that is just getting started. Pilots at Southwest Airlines, the Chicago Police Union, parents at school board meetings, Americans are pushing back because Americans value freedom. A few weeks ago, Terry McAuliffe said this, I don't think parents should be telling schools what to teach. When government tells parents we're smarter than you, Americans aren't going to tolerate it. When the Attorney General of the United States sets up a snitch line on parents, Americans aren't going to tolerate it. I think they're going to stand up to this accelerated march to communism that we now see. America's going to fight the good fight. They're going to finish the course. They're going to keep the faith because Americans value freedom. Mr. Chairman, we have a video we'd like to play.
Mr. Chairman.
We have a video we'd like to play.
Mr. Chairman,
Dean,
I
what
object.
purpose does Ms. Dean seek recognition?
I object. I'm reserving my right to object to the video.
Why would
May I inquire as to whether the gentleman has followed the Judiciary Committee's AV protocol by providing 48 hours notice to the committee's clerk that he was going to use a video?
We provided notice. Well, first of all, there's no 48-hour rule. It's not in the committee rules. Second, we did let the committee staff, the majority, know that we had a video, and we gave the video to him this morning.
Responding to the gentlelady's request, he did not. He did not supply the 48 hours rule. 48 hours notice required by the rule.
Mr. Chairman.
Then I insist on my objection. Having failed to follow the bipartisan protocol, I insist on my objection.
An objection has been heard. The video will not be shown.
I appeal the ruling of the chair.
The ruling has been made. There's been an objection.
There's been no ruling that was made. There's been no ruling that's been made.
Chairman,
There's been an objection.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to speak regarding.
No, that's out of order. This is not debatable.
Well, what's out of order is there is no rule that requires a 48-hour notice. That's what's out of order.
There is such a rule.
There is not in our rules.
Mr. Chairman, what are you afraid of?
There is such a rule. You objected last year. You were told there was such a rule.
Mr. Chairman, what are our colleagues on the other side of the aisle afraid of?
Gentleman has
Are they afraid of videos of parents?
The gentleman was recognized for his opening statement. Is he finished with his
Overruling in the
opening
chair.
statement?
I'm not finished with my opening.
I seek recognition for a
Gentleman
parliamentary
should
inquiry.
proceed with his
Not a
opening
rule.
statement.
It's not a rule. It's what you said. I think the term you used is it's protocol.
The gentlewoman
Don't govern
objected.
the conduct of the committee. Rules do. That's not a rule. We had a video. We understood you had a video.
I seek recognition for a parliamentary inquiry.
Gentlewoman objected because you failed to follow the rule. Her objection is sustained.
Mr. Chairman, I
Does
seek,
the gentleman have anything else?
I seek
We had a
recognition for a parliamentary inquiry.
We had. Yeah, but I'll yield back in just a second, and particularly if you're going to
The gentleman
recognize.
yields back?
No, I haven't yielded back yet. I said I will in a second. It's a video about parents at school board meetings, moms and dads speaking at school board meetings, and you guys aren't going to let us play it?
It will not be,
Objection has been heard.
an objection has been heard that you failed to give the 48 hours required by the rule, and therefore
What
will not be
rule?
heard.
Mr. Chairman, what rule?
You have to cite the
Parliamentary
rule.
inquiry, what rule? Please present the rule.
In the case of visual materials under the leadership of my predecessor, Chairman Goodlatte, a Republican, the committee developed a written protocol for managing the use of audiovisual materials in our hearings.
Written protocol.
This protocol simply requires members to provide 48 hours notice they are going to use audiovisual materials. Until recently, this protocol was not controversial. It was a helpful tool we used to manage hearings and make sure videos played properly. The gentlewoman has objected to the materials because the gentleman did not provide the agreed-upon 48 hours notice. Playing audiovisual materials during a committee hearing is the equivalent of introducing printed materials into the hearing record. In the normal course of business, we do not object to each other's requests, but members have the right to object if they so choose, and an objection has been heard.
Mr. Chairman, did we ever vote on that?
The gentleman is.
That's a clever written statement, but a
Gentleman was recognized
protocol
for
is not a
opening
rule.
statement.
Mr. Chairman, obviously you're not going to let us play it. Obviously you're going to censor us, which is sort of the conduct of the left today, it seems, and Democrats today, it seems. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. A point of order? Gentleman will state his point of order.
Not a point of order, as I said before.
That is not a point of order, as I said before. Playing audiovisual materials during a committee hearing is the equivalent of introducing printed materials into the hearing record. In the normal course of business, we do not object to each other's requests, but members have the right to object if they so choose, and an objection has been heard.
That's not a valid point. The gentleman has not made a valid
The
point.
gentleman has not made a valid point of order.
Now we recognize
The
that.
gentleman.
Move the table. Move the table.
There's nothing to appeal. There's been no ruling. There's been no ruling.
There's just been an objection.
There's just been an objection, and the objection has been
So
heard.
now we'll introduce the Attorney General.
Now we'll introduce the Attorney General. I will now introduce today's witness. Merrick Garland was sworn in as the 86th Attorney General of the United States on March 11th, 2021. Immediately preceding his confirmation as Attorney General, Mr. Garland was a judge of the United States Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit. He was appointed to that position in 1997, served as Chief Judge of the Circuit from 2013 to 2020, and served as Chair of the Executive Committee of the Judicial Conference of the United States from 2017 until 2020. In 2016, President Obama nominated him of Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court. Before becoming a federal judge, Attorney General Garland spent a substantial part of his professional life at the Department of Justice, including as Special Assistant to the Attorney General, Assistant United States Attorney, Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the Criminal Division, and Principal Associate Deputy Attorney General. Earlier in his career, Attorney General Garland was in private practice, and he also taught at Harvard Law School. He earned both his undergraduate and law degrees from Harvard University. Following law school, he clerked for Judge Henry Friendly of the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit and for Supreme Court Justice William Brennan. We welcome the Attorney General, and we thank him for participating today. Now, if you'd please rise, I will begin by swearing you in. Raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm, or under penalty of perjury, that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct, to the best of your knowledge, information, and beliefs, so help you God? Let the record show that the witness has answered in the affirmative. Thank you, and please be seated. Please note that your written statement will be entered into the record in its entirety. Accordingly, I ask that you summarize your testimony in 5 minutes. To help you stay within that time limit, there's a timing light on your table. When the light switches from green to yellow, you have 1 minute to conclude your testimony. When the light turns red, it signals your 5 minutes have expired. Attorney General Garland, you may begin.
Good morning, Chairman Nadler, ranking members, distinguished members of this committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. In my address to all Justice Department employees on my first day in office, I spoke about 3 co-equal priorities that should guide the department's work: upholding the rule of law, keeping our country safe, and protecting civil rights. The first core priority, upholding the rule of law, is rooted in the recognition that to succeed and retain the trust of the American people, the Justice Department must adhere to the norms that have been part of its DNA since Edward Levy's tenure as the first post-Watergate Attorney General. Those norms of independence from improper influence, of the principled exercise of discretion, and of treating like cases alike define who we are as public servants. Over the past 7 months that I have served as Attorney General, the department has reaffirmed and, where appropriate, updated and strengthened policies that are foundational for these norms. For example, we strengthened our policy governing communications between the Justice Department and the White House. That policy is designed to protect the department's criminal and civil law enforcement decisions and its legal judgments from partisan or other inappropriate influence. We also issued a policy to better protect the freedom and independence of the press by restricting the use of compulsory process to obtain information from or records of members of the news media. The second priority is keeping our country safe from all threats, foreign and domestic, while also protecting our civil liberties. We are strengthening our 200 joint terrorism task forces, which are the essential hubs for international and domestic counterterrorism cooperation across all levels of government. For FY22, we are seeking more than $1.5 billion, a 12% increase for our counterterrorism work. We are also taking aggressive steps to counter cyber threats, whether from nation states, terrorists, or common criminals. In April, we launched both a comprehensive cyber review and a ransomware and digital extortion task force. In June, we seized a $2.3 million ransom payment made in Bitcoin to the group that targeted Colonial Pipeline. Keeping our country safe also requires reducing violent crime and gun violence. In May, we announced a comprehensive violent crime strategy which deploys all of our relevant departmental components to those ends. We also launched 5 cross-jurisdictional strike forces to disrupt illegal firearms trafficking in key corridors across the country, and to support local police departments and help them build trust with the communities they serve. Our FY22 budget requests over $1 billion for grants. We are likewise committed to keeping our country safe from violent drug trafficking networks that are, among other things, fueling the overdose epidemic. Opioids, including illegal fentanyl, caused nearly 70,000 fatal overdose deaths in 2020. We will continue to use all resources at our disposal to save lives. Finally, keeping our country safe requires protecting its democratic institutions, including the one we sit in today, from violent attack. As the committee is well aware, the department is engaged in one of the most sweeping
with local school board. That's
in connection with the January 6th attack on the Capitol. The department's third core priority is protecting civil rights. This was a founding purpose when the Justice Department was established in 1870. Today, the Civil Rights Division's work remains vital to safeguarding voting rights, prosecuting hate crimes, ensuring constitutional policing, and stopping unlawful discrimination. This year, we doubled the size of the Civil Rights Division's voting section, and our FY22 budget seeks the largest ever increase for the division, totaling more than 15%. We have appointed department-wide coordinators for our hate crimes work, and we have stepped up our support for the Community Relations Service and the department-wide efforts to advance environmental justice and tackle climate change. We are also revitalizing and expanding our work to ensure equal access to justice. In the days ahead, we look forward to working with Congress to restore a standalone access to justice office within the department dedicated to addressing the most urgent legal needs of communities across America. In addition to these core priorities, another important area of departmental focus is ensuring antitrust enforcement, reinvigorating that enforcement, combating fraud, and protecting consumers. We are aggressively enforcing our antitrust laws by challenging anti-competitive mergers and exclusionary conduct, and by prosecuting price fixing and allocation schemes that harm both consumers and workers. In FY22, we are seeking additional resources to
followed a request from the National School Board Association for an investigation of what it called threats against its members, likening actions by some parents to, quote, domestic terrorism.
This is absolutely unacceptable in a modern democracy for the Attorney General of the United States to sic the FBI on parents concerned about their children's education, to begin to classify them at the behest of the National School Board Association as domestic terrorists is the end. It's the final line. It's the straw that breaks the camel's back.
Let's call it what it is. They are saying that moms are now domestic terrorists because we are standing up for our children.
CRT is racist. It is abusive. It discriminates against one's color.
Just coming off of May 31st, marking the 100 years of the Tulsa riots, it is sad that we are even contemplating something like critical race theory, where children will be separated by their skin color and deemed permanently oppressors or oppressed in 2021.
2 medical degrees. No mom, no dad in the house. Worked my way through college. Sat there and hustled my butt off to get through college. You gonna tell me somebody that looked like all y'all white folks kept me from doing that? Are you serious?
I am not oppressed. I'm not oppressed, and I'm not a victim. I have 3 children. They are not oppressed either, although they are victims. Racism in America would by and large be dead today if it were not for certain people and institutions keeping it on life support. Sadly, one of those institutions is the American education system.
I have personally heard teachers teaching CRT, and we have had an assembly shut down because Duval County Public School System consultant thought it would be a great idea to separate students by race. This is unacceptable.
My child is 5 years old. All she should be thinking about is Barbie dolls and going to the pool with my wife and wrestling with her daddy. And I'm being told that I'm going to send my child to school and she's going to be taught about the color of her skin.
My 5-year-old is being peddled transgender books in her library. Teenagers are being served pornography under the guise of young adult literature. Do something. Be a leader. Because if you know what, the citizens of this county deserve better.
I don't know about you, but telling my child or any child that they are in a permanent oppressed status in America because they are Black is racist, and saying that white people are automatically above me, my children, or any child is racist as well.
My child is not oppressed, and don't assume that. As long as you Marxists push your unconstitutional agenda on my child, she will not be returning back to Loudoun County schools. You cannot tell me what is or is not racist. Look at me.
I quit your policies, I quit your trainings, and I quit being a cog in a machine that tells me to push highly politicized agendas on our most vulnerable constituents, the children.
This is not something that we can stand for in our country. And don't take it from me, look at the writers of these types of publications. Our ancestors, white, Black, and others, hung, bled, and died right alongside each other to push America towards that more perfect union. If this continues, we will look back and be responsible for the dismantling of the greatest country in the world by reverting to teaching hate and that race is a determining factor on where your destiny lies.
reinvigorate antitrust enforcement across the board. We also stood up the COVID-19 Fraud Enforcement Task Force to bring to justice those who defrauded the government of federal dollars meant for the most vulnerable among us. In sum, in 7 months, the Justice Department has accomplished a lot of important work for the American people, and there is much more to be done. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you for your testimony. We will now proceed under the 5-minute rule with questions, and I will recognize myself to begin for 5 minutes. Mr. Attorney General, in the 2013 decision Shelby County versus Holder, the Supreme Court gutted Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, rendering its pre-clearance provision inoperative. As a direct result of this decision, the right to vote has come under a renewed and steady assault, and states have spent the past 8 years enacting a slew of barriers to voting that target or impact communities of color and other historically disenfranchised groups. Before this committee in August, Assistant Attorney General Kristen Clark testified that, quote, Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act was truly the heart of the act and called it the department's most important tool for safeguarding voting rights in our country. Why is Section 5 preclearance so crucial to combating discriminatory voting practices?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Voting, the right to vote is a fundamental aspect of our democracy. In many ways, it is the right from which all other rights occur. The Voting Rights Act was a gem of American legislation, as President Ronald Reagan said, and as all other presidents on both sides of the aisle have said. A key part of that provision was Section 5, as you said. This was a pre-clearance provision, which required in specified states where there had been discriminatory practices that provisions for changes in patterns or practices of voting should be submitted to the department for pre-clearance to determine whether they violated the act. There was another alternative. If a state did not like the result from the Justice Department, it could go to a court and get a resolution there. But the great idea of pre-clearance was to allow advance review before these things went into effect, rather than require the Justice Department on a one-by-one basis after the fact. It makes it extremely difficult to attack unlawful prescriptions on voting practices.
Thank you. Assistant Attorney General Clark testified that Section 2 is no substitute for the important swift preemptive review that was provided by way of Section 5 pre-clearance process. The full impact of the Supreme Court's recent decision in Brnovich versus DNC on Section 2 remains to be seen. However, in the absence of an operational Section 5 pre-clearance regime, what steps has the Justice Department taken to increase enforcement of voting rights under Section 2?
So, Section 2 is a remaining tool. It's extraordinarily important, and it does give us some impact. In order to better effectuate that provision, we have doubled the size of the voting rights section because it will take more people to evaluate state laws on a one-by-one basis. So we are going about doing that. We have brought one case, as you know, with respect to changes in Georgia. We are looking carefully at other states, and we are looking carefully at the redistricting, which is occurring as we speak now as a result of the decennial census. We continue to do that and vigorously make sure that Section 2 is appropriately enforced.
But if you should find that a given state's reapportionment, for example, was unconstitutional and you sued, it could take 6 or 8 years for those suits to be resolved, as we have seen. And that's one reason, another reason for the necessity for Section 5 pre-clearance. My time is short, so I have only one last question for you. The country and the Congress is still reeling from the events of January 6th, and the Select Committee is diligently pursuing its investigation into the insurrection. This week, Chairman Thompson and his colleagues voted to hold in contempt Steve Bannon, who failed to comply with the Select Committee subpoenas, and the measure will be taken up by the House later today. Unfortunately, the actions of individuals like Mr. Bannon are not new to us. Many committees, including this one, repeatedly faced obstruction from the prior administration and the former president's loyal allies. Congress, however, is not an enforcement body and looks to the department to handle criminal matters when appropriate. So I ask you, Mr. Attorney General, regardless of politics, will the department follow the facts and the law and expeditiously consider the referrals put forth by the Select Committee if and when they are approved by the full House?
So the department recognizes the important oversight role that this committee, the House of Representatives, and the Senate play with respect to the executive branch. I will say what a spokesperson for the U.S. Attorney's Office in the District of Columbia said, I think yesterday or the day before. The House of Representatives votes for referral of a contempt charge. The Department of Justice will do what it always does in such circumstances. It will apply the facts and the law and make a decision consistent with the principles of prosecution.
Thank you very much.
Do we have Mr. Attorney General pull the mic a little? Could you pull the mic a little closer, Mr. Attorney?
Oh, I'm sorry. Is that better?
Mr. Shabbat?
Sure, of course.
Yeah, Mr. Shabbat.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'd start by asking unanimous consent that an op-ed that appeared in last week's Wall Street Journal by the author of the Patriot Act, Mr. Sensenbrenner, former chairman of this committee, entitled "The Patriot Act Wasn't Meant to Target Parents," be entered into the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. Attorney General, most of us had other jobs before we got here to Congress. For example, I practiced law for quite a few years. I was a county commissioner. I was a member of Cincinnati City Council. And before that, I was a school teacher in Cincinnati in the inner city. All the students in the school were African American, and I taught the 7th and 8th grade. It was my experience that the kids who did the best were the ones who had parental involvement in their education. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, I think parental involvement is very important in education.
Thank you. Now, with that in mind, having parents involved in their children's education, I have to say I found it deeply disturbing that the National School Board Association convinced the Biden administration to sic you and your Justice Department, the FBI, the full power of the federal law enforcement in this country on involved parents, as if they were domestic terrorists. One of the tools in your arsenal of weapons, of course, is the Patriot Act that I just mentioned. Not many current members of this committee were here when we passed the Patriot Act, but I was. And Mr. Chairman, you were too. And I remember clearly that we were both concerned about potential abuse of this new law enforcement tool. And that's why, for example, we insisted on sunset provisions on some aspects of the Patriot Act. But I can tell you, not in a million years did we dream that one day we'd see the Justice Department treat American parents as domestic terrorists. And in a primer on domestic terrorism issued last November by none other than the FBI, Mr. Attorney General, the FBI explicitly stated that, quote, under FBI policy and federal law, no investigative activity related to domestic terrorism may be initiated based on First Amendment activity, unquote. Now, parents speaking up at a school board meeting against the teaching of critical race theory or anything else that they want to talk about is clearly a First Amendment activity. Now, of course, school board meetings can sometimes be highly emotional affairs. Parents do care about their kids' education, how they're being taught, what they're being taught. And these parents have every right to be heard, even if former Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe thinks otherwise. Now, no one has the right to be violent or threaten violence. And if anyone does that, they can be dealt with by security or by local law enforcement. But we don't need the vast power of the federal government throwing its weight around. We don't need you, your Justice Department, or the FBI trampling on the rights of American parents who just want the best possible education for their children. So, Mr. Attorney General, let me ask you this. According to the Sarasota Herald Tribune, one example of a so-called terrorist incident was a parent merely questioning whether school board members had earned their high school diplomas. Now, that might have been rude, but does that seem like an act of domestic terrorism that you or your Justice Department ought to be investigating?
Absolutely not, and I want to be clear, the Justice Department supports and defends the First Amendment right of parents to complain as vociferously as they wish about the education of their children, about the curriculum taught in the schools. That is not what the memorandum is about at all, nor does it use the words domestic terrorism or Patriot Act. Like you, I can't imagine any circumstance in which the Patriot Act would be used in the circumstances of parents complaining about their children, nor can I imagine a circumstance where they would be labeled as domestic terrorism.
Thank you. I'm nearly out of time, so let me just conclude with this. We ought to be encouraging parents to be actively involved in the education of their children. After all, if our children are to be competitive with the children of Japan and South Korea and India and yes, China, for tomorrow's jobs, they better be getting a top-notch education in this country. Let's support and welcome parental involvement, not use the vast powers of federal law enforcement to target parents as domestic terrorists. And I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Once again, I would remind all members that guidance from the Office of Attending Physician states that face coverings are required for all meetings in an enclosed space, such as committee hearings, except when you are recognized to speak. And that means you, Jim, and Marjorie, and Matt, and a lot of other people I can't recognize because of distance, etc. So please, everyone, observe that rule. I'll now recognize Ms. Lofgren for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Attorney General, for being here this morning. At your confirmation hearing, you characterized what happened on January 6th as, quote, a heinous attack that sought to disrupt a cornerstone of our democracy. I agree with that. And in your written testimony today, you point out that the intelligence community has identified domestic violent extremists as the primary threat to our nation, and further note that your department is committed to keeping our country safe by protecting our democratic institutions. I would note that protecting our democratic institutions is not limited to the Department of Justice. The Congress also has that obligation to protect our democracy. To that end, we have a select committee that is reviewing the events leading up to January 6th and has a legislative mandate to devise legislative recommendations to prevent future acts of domestic extremist violence, to strengthen the resiliency of our nation's democratic institutions, to propose laws that will keep our democratic systems safer. Now, with that background in mind, we are, as you're aware, seeking information to inform us to perform that role. Before you were AG, you were a judge, and I note that in your judicial role, in 2004, there was a case, Judicial Watch versus the Department of Justice, where the court ruled, quote, presidential communications privilege applies only to documents solicited and received by the president or his immediate White House advisors who have broad and significant responsibility for investigating and formulating the advice to be given to the president. I think you're familiar with that case. Do you think that's still good law?
Yeah, I think the D.C. Circuit is a good source of law.
In the Supreme Court case Nixon versus administrator of GSA in 1974, the Judicial Watch case actually relied on that precedent. That case said that the communications to advise the president would be only on official government matters. Do you think that's still good law?
I think the Supreme Court's opinion is still good law until it's reversed, and I see no sign that it's going to be reversed.
We were here in the Judiciary Committee pursuing testimony from Mr. McGahn, and the court wrote in the 2019 case, and this is a quote, to make the point as plain as possible, it is clear to this court for the reasons explained above that with respect to senior level aides, absolute immunity from compelled congressional process simply does not exist. Do you think that's still good law?
I believe the McGahn case is still good law.
Recently, the Department of Justice informed a federal district court that, quote, conspiring to prevent the lawful certification of the 2020 election and to injure members of Congress and inciting the riot at the Capitol, quote, would plainly fall outside the scope of employment of an officer or employee of the United States of America. Since your department filed that, I assume you agree with that.
Yes.
So I just want to mention, I'm not going to ask you about what your department will do if the House of Representatives adopts a referral to your department, because I take you at your word that you will follow the precedent, you will follow the law in the ordinary course of events. I would just note that your defense of the rule of law for the Department of Justice and your standing for the rule of law also means the rule of law for the Congress of the United States. Article 1 was the first article for a reason. We have a role to play in making sure that our democratic institutions are defended. I thank you for your service to our country, and I look forward to your deliberations so that the Congress of the United States can play its rightful role in defending our institutions and adopting legislation that will strengthen our institutions and preserve and protect our democratic republic. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. Mr. Gomert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Judge Garland, for being here. You stated a moment ago you couldn't imagine a parent being labeled a domestic terrorist, but parents all over the country believe that's exactly what you labeled them by your memo indicating you were going to get involved in board meetings, school board meetings, because of the threat of domestic terrorism. So if you can't imagine a parent being labeled a domestic terrorist, I would encourage you to redo your memo so it's not so perceived as being so threatening to people concerned about their kids' education. But I want to take you to January 6th. It's a very common topic here for people. Has any defendant involved in the January 6 events been charged with insurrection?
I don't believe so.
Well, that is the word most used by Democrats here on Capitol Hill about January 6th, but no one has been charged with it that we could find either. How many protesters on January 6th were charged with obstructing an official proceeding for 4 to 6 hours? Do you know?
I don't know the exact number. Obviously, there are 650 who were arrested, some for assaulting officers, some for obstructing proceedings, some for conspiring to obstruct proceedings. I can get you the numbers for each of the specific.
Well, thank you. I'd be interested in getting that number. But regarding the men who broke the glass in the two doors there at the speaker's lobby when the two Capitol Police been standing there, moved to the side to allow them access, were any of those people who broke glass and did damage to those doors working for the FBI or other federal law enforcement entities?
This is an ongoing criminal investigation, and I'm really not at liberty to discuss. There have been some filings in a nature of discovery, which has been provided to the defendants. But other than that, I can't discuss this now.
Well, we've seen some of those filings that talk about persons 1 through 20-something. Were those persons 1 designated by number, were those people that were employed by the FBI or federal entities, or were they confidential informants?
Again, I don't know those specifics, but I do not believe that any of the people you're mentioning charged in the indictment were either one.
Was a determination ever made as to who repeatedly struck Roseanne Boylan in the head with a rod before she died?
Again, I think this was a matter that was investigated by the U.S. Attorney's Office. And
Well, there's a witness on video saying that it was a D.C. Metro policeman. I didn't know if you'd been able to confirm or deny that. Well, on June 22nd of 2016, Judge, most of the Democrat members of Congress took over the House floor, and for the first time in American history, members of Congress obstructed official proceedings, not for 4 to 6 hours, but for virtually 26 hours. Not just violating over a dozen House rules, but actually committing the felony that some of the January 6 people are charged with. That was during the Obama administration. Nobody has been charged. And those kind of things where you let Democrat members of Congress off for the very thing that you're viciously going after people that were protesting on January 6th gives people the indication that there is a two-tiered justice system here in America. You know well, you've been a circuit court judge, you know well that confinement, pretrial confinement, is not ever to be used as punishment. Yet there are people, and understand, as a former tough law and order judge, I would sentence everyone, regardless of their party, who did violence or committed crimes on January 6th to appropriate sentences. But for heaven's sake, they are being abused in the D.C. jail. Have you done an inspection over there of the D.C. jail since your department has some jurisdiction?
so my understanding is Judge Lamberth, who I respect very much, has...
Yeah, he held the warden in contempt, but we haven't seen improvement.
He asked for a review, and the Justice Department is conducting a review. The marshals did an inspection the other day, which was reported in the news, and the Civil Rights Division is examining the circumstances. This is the District of Columbia Jail. It's not a Bureau of Prisons, you understand.
Time of the gentleman has expired. As I've explained to members on many occasions, I view the wearing of face masks as a safety issue, and therefore is an important matter of order and decorum. Because I am responsible for preserving order and decorum in this committee, I am requiring members and staff attending this hearing to wear face masks. I came to this decision after the Office of the Attending Physician released its guidance requiring masks in committee hearings some time ago. I note that some members are still not wearing masks. The requirement is that members wear their masks at all times when they are not speaking. I will take members in compliance with this rule into consideration when they seek recognition. I see Mr. Roy, for example. I now recognize Ms. Jackson-Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, let me thank you for your enormous work that the department is doing. I have a series of questions. Help me out and in your answers so that I can secure responses. As you well know, the Senate Judiciary Committee did an outstanding report on how the former president and his allies pressured DOJ to overturn the 2020 election. In particular, they noted a series of dates in which they assessed that the former president grossly abused the power of the presidency. He also arguably violated the criminal provisions of the Hatch Act, which prevents any person from commanding